It was a brilliant plan to solve a dangerous problem, but it backfired in the most bizarre and spectacular way. What if the very solution you create to fix something is the exact reason? It gets 100 times worse. This isn't a story about a mistake. It's a story about a simple idea that unleashed a chaos no one could have predicted. Prepare to have your mind blown by the logic of the Cobra Effect. Welcome to the channel, The Eternal Odyssey. Act 1, the problem emerges. The year was 1899, and the merciless Indian sun blazed down upon the crowded, maze-like streets of Delhi. The air hung thick with dust, spices, and the constant hum of human activity. Horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones, while vendors hawked their wares from every corner. But beneath this vibrant tapestry of colonial life lurked a deadly menace that sent shivers down the spine of every resident. Cobras. These serpentine assassins had made themselves thoroughly at home in the sprawling metropolis. They slithered through drainage systems, coiled in dark corners of homes, and emerged from seemingly nowhere to strike terror into the hearts of unsuspecting citizens. The Indian cobra, with its distinctive hood and lethal venom, had become the uninvited guest at Delhi's urban party. In the stately offices of the British colonial administration, concern was mounting. Sir Reginald Worthington, the Deputy Commissioner for Public Health and Safety, sat behind his mahogany desk, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief as he reviewed the latest casualty reports. The numbers were troubling. 17 cobra bite fatalities in the past month alone, with dozens more requiring urgent medical attention. This simply cannot continue, Sir Reginald muttered to his aide, a nervous young clerk named Timothy Ashford. The Governor General is breathing down our necks. The newspapers back in London are having a field day with headlines about death in the colonies and Britain's failure to protect its subjects. Something must be done, and quickly. Timothy adjusted his spectacles nervously. But sir, what can we possibly do? The local snake charmers we've consulted say the cobra population has always been substantial. They're part of the natural ecosystem here. Sir Reginald waved dismissively. Nonsense. We British didn't conquer half the world by accepting that problems are insurmountable. There's always a solution. We simply need to apply proper administrative thinking to the matter. The colonial government had already tried conventional approaches. They'd hired professional snake catchers, organized neighborhood watch programs, and even attempted to introduce mongoose populations in certain areas. But Delhi was vast. The cobra population seemed endless, and for every snake removed, more appeared to take its place. It was during a particularly heated administrative meeting that the fateful idea emerged. The room was filled with the usual suspects: colonial administrators in their crisp white uniforms, local officials trying to bridge to worlds, and various experts who claimed to understand the serpentine menace. Gentlemen, announced Sir Reginald, rising to his feet with the confidence of a man who believed bureaucracy could solve any problem. I propose we harness the one force that has never failed to motivate human behavior: financial incentive. The room fell silent except for the lazy whir of the ceiling fan and the distant sounds of Delhi's streets filtering through the windows. Sir Reginald continued, his voice gaining momentum as he warmed to his theme. We shall offer a bounty, a handsome reward for every dead cobra brought to designated collection points. Throughout the city, we'll mobilize the entire population to become our snake hunters. Every man, woman, and child will have a vested interest in ridding Delhi of this menace. Colonel Marcus Pemberton, a grizzled veteran of several frontier campaigns, stroked his gray mustache thoughtfully. How much are we talking about? Worthington, 2 rupees per cobra. Sir Reginald announced triumphantly, enough to make it worthwhile, not so much as to bankrupt the treasury. To put this in perspective, 2 rupees represented nearly a week's wages for many of Delhi's working poor. It was a sum that could feed a family for several days, purchase new clothing, or provide the seed money for a small business venture. In a city where poverty was as common as the cobras themselves, this bounty represented genuine opportunity. Dr. Maharaj Singh, one of the few Indian officials present, and a man whose medical background gave him intimate knowledge of cobra bite victims, raised a cautious hand. Sir, might I suggest we consider the potential complications of such a policy? In my experience, financial incentives can sometimes produce unexpected behaviors. Sir Reginald's response was swift and dismissive. Dr. Singh, I appreciate your concerns, but we're talking about a simple transaction here. Dead snake equals payment. What could possibly go wrong? The beauty of this system is its elegant simplicity. Act 2, the illusion of success. The bounty program launched with great fanfare. On a sweltering Monday morning in July, notices were posted throughout Delhi in English, Hindi, and Urdu, explaining the new policy in terms that even the most illiterate citizen could understand through accompanying illustrations. Collection points were established at police stations, government offices, and major market squares. Initially, the results seemed nothing short of miraculous. Within the first week, over 300 dead cobras were brought to collection points across the city. The sight was both gratifying and horrifying. Wheelbarrows full of serpentine corpses, their distinctive hoods slack in death, their once dangerous fangs now harmless. Word spread like wildfire through Delhi's extensive gossip networks. Stories emerged of brave individuals who had discovered and dispatched cobras hiding in their homes, gardens, and workplaces. A young man named Rajesh became something of a local celebrity when he brought in 8 cobras in a single day, claiming to have discovered a nest in an abandoned building. The payment process was efficient and straightforward. Citizens would arrive at collection points, carrying their deadly cargo in sacks, baskets, or simply draped over sticks. Officials would count the corpses, verify they were indeed cobras as opposed to harmless snakes, and dispense payment on the spot. No questions were asked about where or how the snakes had been obtained. Dead cobras were dead. Cobras. Sir Reginald found himself basking in administrative glory. His daily reports to the Governor General painted a picture of unprecedented success. The cobra menace is being systematically eliminated. He wrote in one particularly self-congratulatory dispatch. Our innovative bounty system has mobilized the entire population. In service of public safety, I predict that within 6 months, Delhi will be virtually cobra-free. The local newspapers, both British and Indian, praised the program. The Delhi Gazette ran headlines like "Brilliant British Solution to Serpent Scourge" and "Bounty System Beats Cobra Curse." Even the usually critical Indian press acknowledged the program's apparent effectiveness. But it was in the narrow alleyways and cramped quarters, where Delhi's poor made their homes, that the most interesting developments were taking place. Word had spread that cobra hunting was not just a civic duty, but a legitimate source of income. Families began organizing hunting expeditions. Children learned to identify cobra hiding spots. Elderly residents shared decades-old wisdom about serpentine behavior patterns. Ramesh Gupta, a cart puller who barely earned enough to feed his family, discovered he had a natural talent for finding cobras. His knowledge of Delhi's hidden corners, gained through years of navigating the city's maze-like streets, proved invaluable. He began earning more from cobra bounties than from his regular work. It's like the Sahib said, Ramesh told his wife as he counted his rupee coins one evening. Simple work, good money. Who would have thought these cursed snakes could become our blessing? 3 months into the program, the statistics were undeniable. Over 2,500 dead cobras have been collected and paid for. Reported cobra bite incidents had decreased by nearly 40%. The program was such an apparent success that other colonial territories began inquiring about implementing similar bounty systems for their own pest problems. Sir Reginald was invited to present his innovative solution at a conference of colonial administrators in Calcutta. His presentation, titled Harnessing Economic Incentives for Public Health Solutions, was received with enthusiastic applause. He returned to Delhi with a commendation from the Governor General and a reputation as an innovative problem solver. But beneath this veneer of success, subtle changes were beginning to occur that would soon expose the fatal flaw in the bounty system's elegant simplicity. Act 3, the entrepreneurial spirit awakens among Delhi's diverse population. Was a man named Krishnan Patel, a former textile merchant whose business had fallen on hard times due to increased competition from British imports. Krishnan possessed two qualities that would prove crucial in the coming transformation: keen business acumen and an intimate knowledge of animal husbandry, gained from his rural upbringing. As Krishnan observed the steady stream of cobra hunters collecting their bounties, his merchant's mind began to work. He noticed patterns that the British administrators, focused on their encouraging statistics, had overlooked. The number of cobras being brought in was not decreasing over time, as one might expect if the population were truly being depleted. Instead, the numbers seemed remarkably consistent, even increasing slightly. More intriguingly, many of the cobras being submitted appeared to be in unusually good condition. Well-fed, healthy specimens that didn't look like they'd been living in the harsh urban environment of Delhi's streets and sewers. Krishnan began to suspect that not all of these cobras were native. Wild snakes! The crucial insight came to him during a conversation with his neighbor, an elderly man who had worked in the Maharaja's palace and knew something about keeping exotic animals. These cobras, the old man mused, examining a particularly fine specimen someone was carrying to a collection. Point: they breed easily if you know what you're doing. Very easily. In fact, that evening, Krishnan made a decision that would change everything. If the government was willing to pay 2 rupees for any dead cobra, regardless of its origin, why not guarantee a steady supply? Why depend on the random luck of finding wild snakes when you could create a more reliable system? Krishnan used his remaining capital to rent a small, nondescript building on Delhi's outskirts, a property that had formerly housed a failed pottery workshop. The location was perfect, isolated enough to avoid unwanted attention, but close enough to the city for convenient transportation of his eventual products. His first challenge was obtaining breeding stock. This proved easier than expected. Delhi's snake charmers, who had been suffering economically as the cobra bounty reduced the wild population they depended on for their performances, were willing to sell healthy breeding pairs at reasonable prices. They asked no questions about Krishnan's intentions, and he volunteered no information. Within a few weeks, Krishnan had established what was probably Delhi's first commercial cobra breeding operation. His setup was simple but effective: large wooden boxes with secure lids. Ranged in the building's cool, dark interior, each box housed a breeding pair of cobras, provided with adequate food, primarily rats, which were never in short supply in Delhi, and water. The breeding cycle of cobras worked in Krishnan's favor. Females typically laid between 20 and 40 eggs, which hatched after about 60 days. With proper care and feeding, young cobras reached a size suitable for bounty collection within 4 to 6 months. Even accounting for mortality and the costs of operation, the profit margins were extraordinary. But Krishnan was not alone in his entrepreneurial insight. Word of his success began to spread through Delhi's informal networks of information exchange. By autumn of that first year, at least a dozen similar operations had sprung up around the city's periphery. The cobra farming industry was born. These early entrepreneurs were careful and clever. They staggered their harvests to avoid suspicion, bringing in cobras at irregular intervals. They mixed wild-caught specimens with their farm-raised ones to maintain the appearance of natural hunting. Most importantly, they kept their operations small and secretive, understanding intuitively that their business model depended on the government remaining ignorant of their activities. The impact on the bounty program's statistics was immediate, but initially interpreted positively. By the colonial administration, the steady, reliable flow of dead cobras seemed to confirm that the policy was working exactly as intended. Sir Reginald continued to file glowing reports, completely unaware that he was now subsidizing not the elimination of cobras, but their mass production. Act 4, the industry expands. By the program's second year, cobra farming had evolved from a few small-scale operations into a thriving cottage industry. What had begun as Krishnan's solitary venture had spawned a network of producers, suppliers, and even specialists who focused on different aspects of the business. The economic impact was significant. Dozens of families who had previously struggled with poverty now enjoyed steady incomes. Ramesh Gupta, the former cart puller, had abandoned his original profession entirely to become a full-time cobra farmer. His wife helped with feeding and care, while their eldest son learned the business with an eye toward eventually expanding the operation. The British Sahib was right, Ramesh told his brother-in-law, gesturing toward the neat rows of breeding boxes that now filled a rented warehouse space. They said this would solve everyone's problems, and it has. Just not the way they expected. The industry had developed its own ecosystem of supporting businesses, rat catchers who provided food for the growing cobra population, found their services in high demand. Carpenters specialized in building appropriate housing for breeding operations. A black market emerged in cobra eggs, which could be purchased by new entrepreneurs looking to start their own farms without the initial investment in breeding stock. Technical knowledge flowed freely within this community. Successful breeders shared insights about optimal feeding schedules, temperature control, and disease prevention. A body of practical expertise developed around maximizing both breeding success and profit margins. Some operators experimented with selective breeding, trying to produce larger cobras that might command higher prices, though this proved unnecessary since the bounty system paid equally for all specimens regardless of size. The most successful entrepreneurs expanded beyond simple breeding. They developed sophisticated timing systems, coordinating their harvests to maintain steady income while avoiding suspicious patterns. Some established multiple small operations rather than single, large ones, both to reduce risk and to make their activities less conspicuous. Quality control became an important consideration. Cobras that died from disease or malnutrition were less likely to be accepted at collection points. So successful farmers invested in proper veterinary care for their stock. Ironically, the bounty system was inadvertently funding some of the most advanced reptilian husbandry practices in colonial India. The geographic spread of cobra farming extended well beyond Delhi's immediate vicinity. Entrepreneurs in surrounding regions realized they could transport their products to Delhi's collection points, effectively expanding their market area. Bullock carts carrying sacks of dead cobras became a common sight on roads leading into the city. Meanwhile, the wild cobra population was actually declining due to habitat disruption and competition from the farming industry for food sources. This created a fascinating inversion as the bounty program continued to pay out record amounts for dead cobras. The actual wild cobra problem it had been designed to solve. was beginning to resolve itself through entirely different mechanisms. The colonial administration remained blissfully unaware of these developments. Their focus was on the raw numbers: cobras collected, bounties paid, reported incidents. The system appeared to be working magnificently. Sir Reginald had been promoted twice and was being considered for transfer to a more prestigious posting. His reputation as an innovative administrator firmly established. Dr. Maharaj Singh, the Indian official who had initially raised concerns about the bounty system, began to notice inconsistencies in the data. The sustained high numbers of cobras being collected seemed inconsistent with what he knew about snake population dynamics. But his concerns were dismissed as overthinking a successful program. Dr. Singh, Sir Reginald told him during one administrative meeting, sometimes success is simply success. Not every positive outcome requires deep analysis. The program works, the people are happy, and Delhi is safer. What more could we ask for? Act 5, the investigation and discovery. The beginning of the end came through an unexpected source. A British journalist named Oliver Hartwell, who had been sent to Delhi to write a feature story about colonial innovation for the London Times. Hartwell was particularly interested in the Cobra Bounty program, which had begun receiving attention in British intellectual circles as an example of creative governmental problem solving. Hartwell's initial interviews supported the program's positive reputation. Government officials spoke glowingly of its success. Citizens praised its economic benefits. Even former critics acknowledged that Cobra-related incidents had decreased substantially. But Hartwell was a thorough investigative reporter, and something about the story's almost uniformly positive narrative roused his professional skepticism. His first hint that something was amiss came during a conversation with a snake charmer named Abdul, whose livelihood had been dramatically affected by the bounty program. Abdul had initially been bitter about the reduction in wild cobras available for his performances, but had recently seemed surprisingly prosperous despite the apparent decline in his traditional profession. Business has been different lately, Abdul told Hartwell cryptically when pressed about his improved circumstances. There are new ways to make money from cobras if you understand the market. Intrigued by this vague comment, Hartwell began investigating more systematically. He spent several days observing activities at various collection points, noting patterns in the timing and nature of cobra submissions. He interviewed citizens who regularly brought in cobras, asking detailed questions about where and how they found their specimens. The breakthrough came when Hartwell followed a group of men who had just collected bounties for an unusually large number of high-quality cobras. Instead of dispersing to their homes as hunters might be expected to do, they traveled together to a compound on Delhi's outskirts. Hartwell's subsequent investigation revealed the shocking truth: extensive cobra breeding operations, designed specifically to supply the government bounty program. Hartwell's expose, published both in local Delhi newspapers and the London Times, created an immediate sensation. His detailed reporting described not just individual breeding operations, but an entire industry that had developed around cobra farming. He interviewed entrepreneurs who spoke proudly of their business acumen, workers who described the technical aspects of cobra husbandry, and families whose entire livelihood now depended on breeding snakes for government bounties. The revelations were devastating for the colonial administration. The program that Sir Reginald had touted as an example of innovative governance was revealed to be an expensive subsidy for cobra reproduction. Far from eliminating Delhi's snake population, the bounty system had created economic incentives for massive expansion of cobra breeding and farming. Governor General Lord Hastings summoned Sir Reginald for an emergency meeting. The conversation, according to later accounts, was brief and brutal. The Governor General reportedly said, "Worthington, you have managed to create the very problem you were supposed to solve, on a scale far beyond anything we originally faced. This is not just administrative failure, it's administrative catastrophe. An immediate investigation was launched to determine the full scope of the cobra farming industry. Teams of inspectors, accompanied by armed guards, began raiding suspected breeding operations throughout Delhi and surrounding areas. What they found exceeded their worst fears. Dozens of facilities housing thousands of cobras, sophisticated breeding programs, and detailed business records documenting the industry's remarkable profitability. The numbers were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that the farming operations were producing 5 times as many cobras as the wild population had ever contained. The government had been paying bounties on approximately 15,000 to 20,000 cobras per year, the vast majority of which had been bred specifically for the purpose of claiming those bounties. Act 6, the Catastrophic Cancellation. Faced with irrefutable evidence of the bounty program's perverse effects, the colonial government made a decision that seemed logical, but would prove to be the final catastrophic error in their cobra management strategy. On a cold morning in February, official notices appeared throughout Delhi announcing the immediate cancellation of the cobra bounty program. The notices, posted in the same locations where the original bounty announcements had appeared 18 months earlier, were stark in their simplicity. Cobra bounty program terminated. No further payments will be made for cobra specimens. By order of the colonial administration, the immediate reaction among Delhi's cobra farming community was shock, followed quickly by anger and desperation. Overnight, thousands of people had seen their primary source of income disappear. Facilities that had been profitable businesses were now expensive liabilities. Most critically, the farmers were left with enormous inventories of live, deadly snakes that were suddenly worthless. Krishnan Patel, the original cobra entrepreneur, found himself facing a crisis that would have challenged even the most seasoned business manager. His warehouse contained approximately 300 adult cobras and nearly 500 juveniles in various stages of development. The ongoing costs of feeding and maintaining these snakes were substantial, but they now generated no revenue whatsoever. Similar situations were faced by every cobra farmer in the Delhi region. Conservative estimates suggested that the industry collectively possessed between 15,000 and 25,000 live cobras at the time of the program's cancellation. These snakes required daily care, regular feeding, and secure housing. Without the bounty payments to offset these costs, maintaining the cobra inventory was economically impossible. The farmers faced several theoretical options, none of them attractive. They could continue maintaining their cobra populations in hopes that the bounty program might be reinstated, but this seemed unlikely given the government's obvious embarrassment over the situation. They could try to sell their cobras to snake charmers or other traditional users, but this market was tiny compared to the massive supply now available. They could attempt to kill all their cobras and dispose of the bodies, but this represented pure economic loss with no recovery of their investments. In retrospect, the decision that many farmers made was probably inevitable, though it represented the final catastrophic link in the chain of unintended consequences that had begun with the original bounty program. Ramesh Gupta held a family meeting to discuss their options. His warehouse contained nearly 200 cobras of various ages, representing months of investment in breeding stock, food, housing, and care. His wife and children had become skilled in cobra husbandry, but these skills were suddenly worthless. The family faced the prospect of returning to poverty. While surrounded by thousands of rupees worth of snakes they couldn't monetize. We cannot afford to keep feeding them, Ramesh's wife pointed out. But we cannot afford to just kill them either. That throws away everything we have worked for. and we cannot find buyers for so many snakes. The solution, when it came to Ramesh and many other cobra farmers, was both logical and disastrous. If they could not profit from their cobra inventory and could not afford to maintain it, the obvious alternative was to eliminate the ongoing costs by disposing of the snakes. And the cheapest, easiest method of disposal was simply to release them. Act 7, The Great Release. What happened next entered Delhi folklore as the Night of 1,000 Serpents, though the actual releases took place over several weeks and involved far more than 1,000 snakes. Across Delhi's outskirts, cobra farmers began opening their breeding boxes and warehouse doors, releasing their entire inventories into the wild. The process was not random or chaotic. Most farmers, despite their frustration with the government's policy reversal, retained enough civic consciousness to avoid releasing cobras directly into populated areas. Instead, they transported their stock to relatively uninhabited areas on Delhi's periphery, abandoned buildings, undeveloped land, areas near water sources that might support wild snake populations. But Delhi was a growing city with limited, truly unpopulated space. Moreover, the released cobras were not wild snakes adapted to finding food and shelter in natural environment. These were farm-raised serpents accustomed to regular feeding and artificial housing. Their survival instincts, while still present, had been somewhat diminished by generations of captive breeding. The massive influx of released cobras had several immediate effects. First, it dramatically increased the actual cobra population in and around Delhi. The first time in the entire saga that the snake population had actually grown, rather than being manipulated by human economic incentives. Second, the concentration of released snakes in relatively small areas meant that cobra density in these locations became extremely high. Most significantly, the farm-raised cobras began seeking food and shelter in the same places that had attracted wild cobras originally, human settlements. But now, instead of the modest population of wild snakes that had originally prompted the bounty program, Delhi faced an influx of thousands of additional cobras, many of them confused, hungry, and desperate. Within days of the first major releases, cobra sightings in Delhi began increasing dramatically. Reports came in of snakes appearing in markets, homes, schools, and government buildings. The very areas that had been declared nearly cobra-free just months earlier were suddenly experiencing cobra encounters at unprecedented levels. Dr. Maharaj Singh, who had watched the entire bounty program unfold with growing unease, was among the first officials to recognize the scope of the disaster. His medical practice began seeing cobra bite cases at rates far exceeding anything from the pre-bounty period. More ominously, many of these bites were from cobras that behaved aggressively and unpredictably, possibly due to the stress and disorientation of sudden release into unfamiliar environments. We now have more cobras in Delhi than when we started, Dr. Singh reported to the Colonial Administration in what would become one of the most quoted documents of the entire affair. But these are not normal wild cobras adapted to urban scavenging. These are farm-raised snakes, concentrated in unnatural numbers, desperate for food and shelter. In our attempt to eliminate a manageable problem, we have created an unmanageable catastrophe. The irony was complete and devastating. The original cobra population that had prompted the bounty program had been estimated at perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 individuals, scattered throughout Delhi's vast urban area. The bounty program had succeeded in reducing this wild population substantially, but the farming industry that the program had inadvertently created had produced far more cobras than had ever existed naturally. When these farm-raised snakes were released, Delhi's total cobra population suddenly became several times larger than it had been at the beginning of the entire intervention. Act 8, aftermath, and consequences. The weeks following the Great Cobra release were chaotic and dangerous. Emergency measures were implemented as reports of Cobra encounters flooded in from across the city. The colonial government, which just months earlier had been celebrating the success of their innovative bounty program, now faced a crisis far worse than the original problem they had sought to solve. Sir Reginald Worthington, whose administrative career had been built on the apparent success of the Cobra bounty program, found himself reassigned to a minor clerical position in a remote outpost. His fall from grace was swift and complete. The Governor General made it clear that the Cobra debacle represented not just policy failure, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of implementing solutions without considering their potential unintended consequences. Professional snake catchers who had been marginalized during the bounty program period suddenly found themselves in high demand again. The colonial government hired every available expert in snake removal and began the expensive, dangerous, and time-consuming process of trying to recapture the thousands of released cobras. This effort would continue for years and cost far more than the original bounty program had ever paid out. The human toll was significant. Cobra bite incidents increased by over 400% in the months following the releases, while improved medical treatment meant that fatality rates were somewhat lower than in earlier periods. The absolute number of people affected by Cobra encounters reached levels never before recorded in Delhi's history. The economic impact extended beyond the immediate costs of cleanup and medical treatment. Delhi's reputation as a safe destination for British families and businesses was severely damaged. Tourism declined, and some British residents requested transfers to other colonial postings they perceived as safer. The city that had been showcased as an example of successful colonial administration became a cautionary tale about governmental incompetence. For the former Cobra farmers, the aftermath was financially devastating. Most had invested their savings and borrowed money to expand their breeding operations. When the market disappeared overnight, they lost not only their current income, but also their entire investment. Many families that had briefly escaped poverty through Cobra farming found themselves in worse economic positions than before the program began. Krishnan Patel, the original Cobra entrepreneur, managed his transition better than most. His business background helped him recognize early warning signs, and he had diversified his holdings rather than putting everything into Cobra breeding. Still, he lost a substantial portion of his wealth and was forced to return to small-scale trading to support his family. Ramesh Gupta's family faced the harshest consequences, having abandoned his cart-pulling work to focus entirely on Cobra farming. Ramesh found himself without either his snakes or his original profession. The skills he and his family had developed in Cobra husbandry had no legitimate market application. They were forced to seek financial assistance from relatives and gradually rebuild their lives. From nothing. Act 9, the birth of a concept. While the immediate consequences of the Cobra bounty program were local and specific to Delhi, the story's significance extended far beyond colonial India. British administrators throughout the empire began receiving reports about the Cobra debacle, and the tale spread through informal networks of colonial officials, academics, and policy experts. The story resonated because it illustrated a fundamental problem that many administrators had observed but never clearly articulated. Well-intentioned policies could produce results exactly opposite to their intended effects. The Cobra bounty program became a perfect case study in what economists and policy experts would later term perverse incentives. This meant situations where financial or other rewards encourage behavior that defeats the policy's original purpose. Academic interest in the Cobra story grew as scholars recognized its broader implications. Economists began analyzing it as an example of market distortion caused by government intervention. Political scientists examined it as a case study in administrative failure. Anthropologists studied it as an example of cultural misunderstanding between colonial administrators and local populations. The story also entered popular culture throughout the British Empire. "Don't create a Cobra effect" became a common warning in administrative circles. The phrase was used to caution against policies that might incentivize the very behavior. They were designed to eliminate. Government training programs began including the Cobra story as an example of how rational individual behavior could produce irrational collective outcomes. More broadly, the Cobra effect became one of the earliest well-documented examples of what systems theorists would later recognize as emergent properties of complex systems. The Cobra farming industry had emerged from the interaction of economic incentives, human creativity, and information gaps in ways that none of the original policy designers had anticipated, or could have anticipated without a much more sophisticated understanding of system dynamics. Act 10, Lessons and Legacy. The Cobra effect's enduring significance lies not just in its immediate consequences, but in its illustration of fundamental principles that continue to challenge policymakers today. The story demonstrates how complex systems can respond to interventions in ways that are logical at the individual level, but catastrophic at the system level. Today, more than a century after the last Cobra farmer released his stock into Delhi's streets, the Cobra effect remains one of the most powerful cautionary tales in policy analysis. It is taught in business schools as an example of unintended consequences, studied in economics courses as an illustration of market distortions, and referenced in public administration programs as a warning about the complexity of social systems. The streets of Delhi eventually returned to normal, though it took years to recapture or eliminate the thousands of released cobras. The colonial administration implemented new, more carefully designed snake control measures that avoided the perverse incentives of the bounty system. But the memory of the Cobra effect lived on, a permanent reminder that in complex systems, solutions can become problems, cures can become diseases, and the road to catastrophe is often paved with the best of intentions. The Cobra effect isn't just a fascinating story from history, it's a powerful lesson for today. It reminds us that when we try to solve a complex problem with a simple solution, we have to ask a bigger question. What else might happen? In the end, the Cobra effect stands as one of history's most perfect examples of Murphy's Law applied to public policy. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, often in ways we never imagined possible. The snakes may be long gone from Delhi's streets, but their lesson slithers on through the corridors of power, wherever people gather to solve the world's problems, a permanent reminder that good intentions, without careful consideration of human behavior and system dynamics, can create catastrophes far worse than the problems they set out to solve. If this story made you think, please hit that like button and let us know what other surprising historical events you would like us to cover in the comments. And for more videos that dig into the real stories behind the biggest ideas, don't forget to share this with a friend and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you.